Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Oklahoma Faith Network's February panel on interfaith relationships in Oklahoma. My name is Tim Atkins, and I serve as the religious educator at the First Unitarian Church of Oklahoma City, and I'm a member of the Religions United panel of the Oklahoma Faith Network. Thanks for joining us this evening or whenever you are choosing to watch our panel discussion tonight. As I said, tonight we're talking about interfaith relationships, and we're honored to have with us Reverend Dr. Lori Walke and Colin Walke, and Dr. Jeannie Sultani. And so I am going to invite our panelists to go ahead and introduce themselves and kind of tell us their faith story. Let's go ahead and start with Reverend Dr. Lori Walke and Colin Walke.
Go on, guys.
Well, thanks, everyone. It's good to be here. I'm Lori Walke, and let's see, our faith journey. Well, both of us were born and raised in Oklahoma, and we met at Oklahoma State. I was raised in the Southern Baptist tradition, and after a winding road and a series of events that had me questioning some of the doctrines that I had been taught, came to a place where I needed to ask questions. But to make this story pretty short, I didn't have a safe place to ask those questions until I met this guy. And Colin was raised in a way, and his journey made it a little bit easier for him to step outside of the Bible Belt that is Oklahoma. And so he provided a pretty safe place for me to start asking questions and exploring, constructing my own understanding and deepening my own faith in Christianity.
Well, so I grew up Colin Walke, and I grew up in Del City, Oklahoma, and I grew up nominally Christian. You know, we went to the high holy days and those sorts of things. And then in 7th grade, I read Bertrand Russell's Why I'm Not a Christian. And I went, oh, I'm an atheist, which was, of course, at that point in time, very contrarian in comparison to my colleagues in school. But that's also what kind of set me down the path of looking at Buddhism, because it was a non-theistic religion. And then fast forward I started studying Buddhism in high school, and through college, I was a philosophy major with an emphasis in religious studies. And I befriended a Southern Baptist minister at the time. And, he really at least softened my view of Christianity, if you will. And so following law school, or during law school, Lori and I started dating, and she and I were at a similar point in our lives of really trying to figure out who we were. And so after that, I began practicing law, wasn't really participating much in religion or anything, or even meditating for that fact, which we can talk about later. But then in 2011, I found my teacher, Bhante Pravatana, who is a monk from Sri Lanka. He's been a monk since he was 11, and he's a teacher in the Theravadan tradition. And so I've been studying under him since 2011, and we still talk daily. So that's kind of my abbreviated faith journey.
That's great. Thank you all for sharing. And Dr. Janine, what's your story?
It's a long story, I guess. I was raised near Kansas City. I had kind of a varied religious background in the Christian tradition. My parents were Methodists, but I was raised largely in an evangelical church with a good friend. My grandmother was also a Catholic who'd kind of fallen away, and in the last years of her life, she explored various routes towards getting back to that. She had a lot of questions that I don't think ever really got resolved, but she opened my eyes to that exploration. And then when I was 21, I met my husband, and he's from the Middle East. And he said, well, I'm a Muslim. And I thought, it's 1977. That's cool. I don't know what that means. All I know is that he was a great guy, and we fell in love and got married. And I gradually learned about his faith tradition over many years. 40 years of marriage, 3 children, 5 grandchildren. And during that time, he was very open to me exploring my path to God, whatever that meant. And he helped me with that. And it was my decision finally in 2001 to convert to becoming a Muslim. But up until that point, we had raised our children in kind of a mixture of all those different things.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. So, a question that just popped in my mind hearing you talk, Dr. Jeannie, is that sometimes folks are hesitant about entering into like an interfaith relationship, whether a friendship or relationship or something, because they're not already an expert in the other person's religion. And so how do you, and then, well, pass the question to the Walkies. How do you overcome that hesitancy and be willing to commit to learning together?
I was fine with learning, and I think that my friends and family had more hesitancy. I don't know, they probably were more worried about where I was going with that. But I thought I have a good person here, and I just want to spend my life with him. And however he got to be that person was fine with me. And we were married. My husband's from Iran, so we were married just before the revolution started and the hostages and the whole horrible stuff like that. So honestly, nobody had ever heard of the place. Nobody knew anything about it. And then a lot of it was negative. So that was just something that we battled together in the next years.
And the Walkies, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think that the hesitancy question is interesting for 2 reasons. First of all, when Lori and I first started dating, we both were trying to focus on rethinking Christianity in a different way. And so that really allowed us a lot of freedom. So neither one of us really had a dogmatic concept of what that meant. On the flip side of that coin, though, because I was raised in Oklahoma, I swim in the sea of Christianity. So when it comes to Buddhism, this is kind of a one-way street. She's the one that's unacquainted with those sorts of concepts. And as a result of that, I think for a long time, I don't know exactly what she thought about what my Buddhist beliefs were. But ultimately, it led to us having a lot of conversations and opportunities for her to read a lot of stuff that I had been writing about on Buddhist philosophy and things along those lines to open it up. And I never felt like this was something that I should evangelize, in part because I don't think that's what Buddhism calls for. But so I never felt compelled to like say, hey, are you interested in this? Or you should do this. It was much more of an open and free process for both of us to come together at the right time and talk about those things.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think we both were in a place of theological humility. And so that just created a pattern for us of asking questions. And to circle back to what Dr. Soltani said, I very much feel the same. I had found someone who I thought was a very good, decent, and I would say faithful person, even though that looked different from the way I had been raised. And perhaps it was easier because I was exploring how to be faithful in ways different than I had been raised.
I hear that. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. So when it comes to some of the major life milestone events like marriage or in some faiths, baptism or child dedications, how do you decide which faith tradition to follow? Or do you find a compromise? How did you navigate those conversations? We'll start with the Walkies for this and then pass it to Dr. Soltani.
Well, one really easy way is to not have children. And if you're child free,
it eliminates some problems. Yeah.
there are some decisions you don't have to cross that bridge at all. You never come to it. You know, I think, you know, an advantage of both of us being raised Christian is that many of the traditions and high holy days, you know, Colin finds meaningful. And in addition to that, as we have both been growing and exploring in our on our paths individually and together, and redefining and making clear what faithfulness is to each of us, we've been able to walk that path together. And so it's not ever an either or for us. It's always a both.
Like, for example, when I took my lay Buddhist vows in 2011, she came to the ceremony. When she became a minister, I was the one that put the stole on her, you know. So they're complementary and not binary conflicting.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And Dr. Sultani, especially in terms of children and some of the children's milestone events, how did you navigate those conversations?
Well, with compromise and listening to each other and just what we were comfortable with together. And I would say that, like the Walkies have illustrated, if you support your partner and celebrate with them, these two things were not conflicting. They were sometimes complementary. My husband came from a society where there are other faiths. So there are Christians in that society, a large number in some places. And so he was comfortable with Christmas. In fact, Iranians kind of like to celebrate all the holidays. They celebrate theirs, they celebrate yours, they celebrate everybody's. And so that wasn't ever a problem. So the kids kind of got the best of both worlds. They got all the different holidays in both cultures. And then, you know, as they got older, they made those choices as to where their paths would be. And we thought it was best, of course, to have them do that, being exposed to both faiths.
Just to summarize what I heard, just to confirm. So you expose your children to both faiths and then kind of let the children decide which faith was calling to them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I love that. I love that. So what's something, and feel free to be funny if you'd like, all right? But what's something unexpected that you had to navigate being in an interfaith relationship that maybe you didn't expect at the beginning? Anything pop into mind?
Can we talk
I see
about
the Walkies are
in-laws?
laughing, so something is there.
Just in-laws, but to be fair, it's not just in-laws; it's also my parents too. So, but again, I don't know what Lori's parents necessarily think. I know that they both read my book on Buddhism, so you know they're open-minded and very respectful and those sorts of things. But and you know, even for my parents, it's an oddity. I think a little bit less so because my father was a philosophy major in the '60s. And so, you know, he gave me my first book on Zen Buddhism when I was like in 8th grade or whatever. So, but for my mother, it's definitely a little bit of a struggle. So the family dynamics is interesting. Yeah.
Understood. Dr. Sultani, any thoughts?
Well, I do have to say, yes, you're right about that. Not so much on my husband's side of the family, because again, they're in a culture where everybody's like, cool, you're Christian, you're Jewish, you're whatever you are, that's great. But my side of the family never was very comfortable with his faith or him being different. They don't understand it. I don't think anybody's ever read a book on it or listened to a lecture or anything else. But I think they're very much kind of in the our way is the only way. And so that was hard. Sometimes we just had to say, you know, I'm sorry, but that's not what we're going to do.
I hear that. And I hear that. Thank you all for sharing. Since both of you, since all of y'all on this call have started off dating interfaithfully and then got married in an interfaith marriage, what are some of the differences you've noticed from the that were some of the different challenges in dating interfaithfully versus marriage, in interfaith marriage. Dr. Sultani, have you noticed any differences?
In our case, no, I don't think so. And I just think that's because of the circumstances at the time. My husband was here going to college. I was in college. We were both at KU. And he was without family. So I think those dynamics weren't present really. And because of the time frame in which it happened, it was the 70s. You know, his family didn't even have a telephone. So he couldn't really call them, you know, or talk to them. And then that whole revolution and the following war with Iraq started. So there was a lot of time that he was by himself, pretty isolated. So we just, you know, I didn't realize that there was going to be a difference in dating traditions in the Muslim world because, again, I was ignorant. And so there are a lot of differences which our kids have had to navigate because there's really not single dating. There's group dating or group events, but that's it. But for us, it wasn't that way. We were kind of living in some sort of pocket at the time.
Well, I mean, I would just say that falling in love and living in love are two different things. And so, you know, for me, marriage has just been an opportunity to deepen our relationship, to be in a place where there's absolute safety and trust in asking questions and exploring things together. An absolute safe place to say, I have no idea, or I have no idea what I'm doing. Can we talk more about this? And I don't know that, you know, especially when you're first dating, there are so many other things you're navigating. And at the time we were both in law school and navigating that, but we also had, as Dr. Sultani was saying, we had a shared culture already. So there were some of those challenges that we just didn't face.
But I will say on the positive side, not a problem. On the positive side, though, I would say that mindfulness and meditation and my dedication to Buddhism really strengthened our marriage, because during law school, about a third of the way through law school, and then for the first 3 years of me practicing law, I quit meditating altogether. I was a big fan of the Buddhist philosophy, but for whatever reason, meditation just didn't work on my simple brain. And after being stressed out, being a litigator, Lori was, you know, I had lost my temper. I've always had a temper. And Lori said, we're going to have to do something about this. Maybe you should look into meditation again. And that's what sent me down the path to find my teacher. And so I think as a result of that, we've had far more harmonious nights than we otherwise would have. So,
yeah. So I think our recommendation there is to lean into that interfaith.
Yeah. Make sure everybody meditates.
Well, speaking of leaning in, I kind of want us to talk a little bit next about how can we learn to be better at interfaith relationships and interfaith friendships. So, for example, at First Unitarian, one of the classes that we like to teach middle schoolers in our faith is called Neighboring Faiths. That's a comparative religions course, but after we learn about the religion, we actually go to a worship service from that religion. And it's a full year-round course for like our upper, middle, lower high school level students. Because at least we believe learning how to do interfaith stuff, you got to learn as kids and keep growing. So what are some tips or some advice you have for folks who are wanting to expand their horizons and have more interfaith friendships, partnerships, but aren't sure where to begin? Let's start with the walkies on that one.
First.
I think that people are surprised to know that Oklahoma City has a vibrant interfaith community that is constantly offering opportunities for engagement and various, experience, Turkish festivals. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be like a worship service or a visit to a house of worship. necessarily, but something that, a festival and a celebration. Mayflower has partnered for decades with Temple B'nai Israel for sex education. And we trade off who hosts that. Of course, the Interfaith Youth Tour with the Oklahoma Interfaith Network. And so I just think there are a ton of opportunities for families and individuals to really engage in a variety of ways that are often very low pressure. So I really would encourage folks to do that. And I will also just say this, as a Christian minister, I encourage Christians, and I would say that the onus is on Christians as the majority religion. It is on us to get out of our churches and deepen relationships. Say yes to invitations during Ramadan. Say yes to invitations to attend events and dinners and celebrations of our interfaith neighbors. They come all the time and are just such examples of generosity and hospitality.
And along those lines, I would say be brave. And not like you have to be brave Rocky Stallone style. But my teacher, he lived in a very bad part of town. It was very dangerous, very impoverished part of town. He lived in a one-room house. It was not really a place that you would think much enlightenment could be found in. But it was scary going there sometimes, even for me. He's since moved to 50th in Portland. But the point being is that sometimes these things can take you to scary places, but if you're brave, they usually pay off.
Dr. Sultani, what advice would you have for folks who are wanting to deepen their interfaith relationships?
Well, I would agree with everything that Dr. Lori said about getting out of your comfort zone and participating. I think Oklahoma City does have a unique community of interfaith people who really reach out and communicate and work to understand each other. I haven't seen that other places I've lived. And I think that the opportunities here, especially for the youth, are definitely there. And just keeping those open lines of communication. And the more you know people, the more you know how much they are like you and not unlike you. So.
And for those who may be watching us outside of Oklahoma City, I want to lift up that in other towns in Oklahoma, they have interfaith communities as well, for example, up in Tulsa and other communities around Oklahoma. But you're also always welcome to come to the Oklahoma City interfaith events. I can send you the invite for that, for sure. So for folks who may be in an interfaith relationship that are starting to struggle over differences of faith, right? Maybe they're not quite fighting yet, but they're starting to notice some differences that are causing some friction. What are some ways from your experience that folks can help, navigate through those frustrations before they become more dramatic? Let's start with Dr. Sultani.
I think it's like any relationship, no matter whether it's issues of faith, or maybe it's your philosophy on money and how it should be spent, or how children should be raised. You have to try to compromise and see the other person's point of view. And then I think support from family, friends, whatever your support system is important too. Faith leaders can help you. Faith leaders on both sides, if there are two sides, I think can be very useful in helping you navigate the questions and the issues that come along. And I know we've often talked to our faith leaders for advice when it's come to that.
Good point. And to the walkies.
If I was going to add anything at all to what Dr. Sultani said, it would simply be to be open to seeing a counselor or a therapist together. It's okay to do that and good to do that before there are any issues. You can establish relationship with a trusted counselor or a therapist so that when there are bumps in the road, you already have someone that you can turn to that might be helpful in facilitating conversation.
I would have nothing to add on that. I think they summed it up great.
Great. Thank you. And then a question specifically for Dr. Sultani. What advice do you have for interfaith couples in Oklahoma wanting to raise their children in a faith environment?
Well, there are multiple ways that you can facilitate their learning. And like the interfaith community, they can go to other houses of worship or learn from other people in that faith. I think just letting them explore what they need to and using resources of knowledge. We have some really great faith leaders here of all different faiths, and I think they're good resources for teaching and helping people learn and be open to that.
I want to lift up also, it can be kind of, if you're not sure if you want to be visiting a house of worship that you don't have a established relationship with, check them out online for a while. That's fine too, especially after the pandemic. A lot of churches from a lot of different faiths have worship services up online, different kind of classes or teachings or lectures up online. Well worth checking out. Now more than ever, it's kind of easier to study interfaith stuff at home because for a couple of years, all the faiths were putting out tons of videos online. Yes. So you can do some great exploration that way as well. I guess we're starting to wrap up. I guess one of my closing questions is going to be, what's one hope you have for the state of interfaith partnerships here in Oklahoma? What do you hope that we here in Oklahoma are moving towards? I'll give you a second to think about that. And I can tell you on my end, I'm hoping that through our interfaith dialogues and interfaith partnerships, we continue to better understand where folks are coming from and better understand where the source of their needs come from. And so we can just have better understand those differences between needs and wants here in Oklahoma. That's kind of what's on my mind. I'm going to pass it over to the Walkies. What's kind of your big hope for the state of interfaith affairs here in Oklahoma? Oh, you are still on mute. My apologies.
Sorry about that.
First time that's happened tonight. Heck.
Someone had to do it. Yes. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
My hope is that increased interfaith dialogue, interfaith relationships are really just a reflection of how similar we are. Our hopes and our dreams are what we want for our kids, what we want for ourselves. It's often utterly in alignment.
And I would hope that it would convince the interfaith community, would convince those outside of the interfaith community, i.e. those who don't think that any religion other than Christianity is the right religion, or quite frankly, any other absolutist, would convince them to participate in the dialogue at least.
Dr. Sultani, what are your hopes?
I think the same as you all have just said. I don't think I have anything to add. We all just need to maybe widen the circle and invite more people in and just make it a better place, really, for discussion and knowing each other.
Fully agreed. And so for folks who are watching who may want to get involved with interfaith events, you can always reach out to the Oklahoma Faith Network and formerly known as the Oklahoma Council of Churches. They are likely to have some great events coming up that are with an interfaith flavor that you can check out. And there are lots of other interfaith organizations in Oklahoma, like the Interfaith Alliance, that puts on, for example, the Interfaith Thanksgiving every year in Oklahoma City. And so there are lots of interfaith events that I encourage you all to check out. if you have been interested. And you can go to the Oklahoma Faith Network's website at okfaith.org to find more interfaith events near you. Thank you all for joining us, and a huge thanks to our panelists, the Walkies and Dr. Satani. Thank you all for joining us on this somewhat chilly Thursday evening. Much appreciated. And thank you all for watching. We hope you have a great evening, and good luck building those interfaith relationships, folks.